Hello, my dear friends. This past week, Klal Yisrael lost three great individuals. About 10 days ago, Rav Yaakov Busel passed away. He was one of the Rosh Yeshivos of Torah V'das. He was a brilliant Talmid Chacham and a tremendous masmid. Over Shabbos, Rav David Feinstein passed away. Rav David was the son of Rav Moshe Feinstein, and he followed in the footsteps of his father. Rav David was a world-renowned posek. People turned to him literally from every corner of the earth to paskin their shilos. And finally, also over Shabbos, the former chief rabbi of England, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Lord Jonathan Sacks, passed away. He was a tremendous spokesman for Klal Yisrael, as well as a brilliant writer, an eloquent writer and philosopher. Each one of these three people deserves separate treatment and words of eulogy. I'm not engaging in a eulogy at this time, but I want to share with you take a little small sliver of Rabbi Sacks's life and draw a lesson that relates to this week's Parsha. In people's lives, there are defining moments. There are times that happen where the person's life is completely altered after that event takes place. Some examples of defining moments in Tanakh are the sin of the Eitz Hadas, that Adam and Chava ate from the Eitz Hadas, Akedas Yitzchak, Kabbalas HaTorah, Kriyas Yamsuf, the rebellion of the Meragim against Moshe and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Egel Hazav, the golden calf. Each one of these events changed in a dramatic manner the course of human history. There is a common denominator between all these events, although each one is separate and distinct, and that is that each one of those events were all monumental. There was something tremendously important that was transpiring at the time. For example, Kriyas Yamsuf. That was the moment in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu was giving the Torah to all of Klal Yisrael. That was a monumental event. In this week's Parsha, we are introduced to a defining moment of a whole different sort, of a whole different nature. And that is something that in and of itself was completely trivial and insignificant. And nonetheless, in spite of the lack of importance, that event also was transformative and had an enormous impact on the course of human history. I'm referring to Eliezer and Rivka. Eliezer asked Rivka for a drink of water. What could be more trivial than asking somebody for a drink of water? And Rivka offers, because she's very magnanimous, she says, don't worry, I'll not only draw for you, I'll also draw for the camels. And because of her willingness to do so, she drew 10 camels. Eliezer says, you're the one that God has selected to be a wife for Yitzchak. She married into the family of Avram Avinu. She became one of the matriarchs, and she secured her place in Jewish history. Imagine if she had responded to Eliezer and said, yeah, you want a drink of water? It'd be my pleasure, but I would have helped you out with your camels, but today's not a good day. I'm very tired. I was up late last night. Her whole life would have been completely different. But because she went and she offered and she implemented giving water to the camels, that changed her life. In and of itself, it was very nice, it was magnanimous, but there's no great significance and importance in watering a camel or giving water to a camel. That is not anything that monumentous. Monumental. It takes place all the time when people have camels. They give the camels water to drink. Nonetheless, for Rivka, it was a defining moment because it was an act of chesed, and that completely transformed her life. And there's a lesson here that a person never knows what is going to be a defining moment. There's a famous medrash in this week's Parsha that says that Rabbi Akiva was teaching his students and they were falling asleep, and he wanted to wake them up. So Rabbi Akiva told them that, you know why Esther ruled over 127 countries in the kingdom of Achashverosh? It was because Sarah lived 127 years, and that was her great-great-grandmother was Sarah. So the 127 countries had to do with Sarah's 127 years. So everybody asks, what does one thing have to do with the other thing? Just because 127, how are they connected? And why did Rabbi Akiva choose to share this particular thought with his Talmidim? The Ger Rebbi, the Chedush Rim, as well as many others, say that Rabbi Akiva saw that the Talmidim were falling asleep. It means that he realized they didn't think that what they were doing at that moment had great significance. And Rabbi Akiva wanted to show them it's not true. You never know how important one moment of performing a mitzvah, a Torah study could be. Sarah lived 127 years. In the merit of the type of life that she lived, and Rashi says, Kulun Shavim Latova, every single day of her life was good. She merited to have a descendant who was going to rule over 127 countries in the kingdom of Achashverosh. And I would point out, as an additional element to this thought, how long was the time span from the time that Sarah lived her life to the time that Esther ruled? It was approximately 1,000 years. For God, the psalmist says, "Ki el shanim beinecha ki el mesmo." 1,000 years for you, God, is like yesterday. Time is irrelevant as far as in the realm of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it didn't matter that Esther lived 1,000 years after Sarah. Nonetheless, in the merit of the type of life that Sarah lived for 127 years, Esther had the schus to be the queen over 127 countries in the kingdom of Achashverosh. And you see the significance of everything that a person does. And sometimes you won't even know what the significance is at the time. It could take 1,000 years or maybe 2,000 years until the significance is recognized. And when Sarah lived 127 years, nobody associated her 127 years with a descendant who was going to be a ruler over 127 countries. But you see how every moment is so consequential, and that was the lesson Rabbi Akiva was teaching his Talmidim. How could you be going to sleep? We're studying God's Torah. You don't know what the impact of one moment of Torah study may have. So I want to relate this to Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks was a towering individual. I saw one of the eulogies that were written about him, or the descriptions about his life. The person wrote, Rabbi Sacks was a towering intellectual and prolific author who was probably the most eloquent champion of Orthodox Judaism to the secular public of his generation. His 25 books on a broad range of subjects in Jewish thought received numerous prizes, and he himself was chosen on many occasions to present the viewpoint of Judaism to the uninitiated, such as when he spoke on the BBC, and he wrote opinion pieces in the British Times. He even had a terrific relationship with the Prince of Wales, who sent a letter to pay tribute to Rabbi Sacks that was read at his Levaya. And the letter, part of the letter read as follows. The Prince of Wales wrote, "His immense learning spanned the sacred and the secular, and his prophetic voice spoke to our greatest challenges with unfailing insight and boundless compassion. His wise counsel was sought and appreciated by those of all faiths, and he will be missed more than words can say." You see how great an impact he had, not only on the Jewish community, but even far beyond. And within the Jewish community, he is a master. There's so many people that have come to me on Shabbos and said, I just read something that Rabbi Sacks wrote, and it moved me so much. He is so powerful. And if you never heard him speak, do yourself a favor, Google him on the internet, or go onto YouTube and watch an address of Rabbi Sacks, and you'll see that he's just absolutely amazing, a person of brilliance and tremendous eloquence. Where did Rabbi Sacks come from? How did he develop into such an accomplished individual? I'm sure that Rav David Feinstein, when he was 10 years old, people knew he's headed in that direction. He was, no doubt, by the time he was bar mitzvah, he finished all of Shas, and he had it on his fingertips, because he was Ramosha Feinstein's son, and he was a genius, and he was, I'm sure, as a young boy, he was a tremendous masmid. So if you met him when he was 10 or 12 or 13 years old, you would say, wow, here is somebody that's going to be one of the future leaders of Klal Yisrael. How about Rabbi Sacks? If you met Rabbi Sacks in his youth, would you have guessed where he was headed? Certainly not. Rabbi Sacks came from a traditional but non-observant Jewish home. He went to school, public schools in London, St. Mary's Primary School and Christ's College, and he was completing his degree, getting a Master's of Arts in Cambridge in philosophy. And he was debating whether he should continue studying economics or law. And as a young man, he decided he wants to travel to America. He heard about the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He wanted to meet the Lubavitcher Rebbe and ask the Rebbe certain questions. The Lubavitcher Rebbe transformed the life of Rabbi Sachs. The Lubavitcher Rebbe said to Rabbi Sachs, he said that the Jewish community is in crisis, and ignorance is our greatest enemy. And he said to Rabbi Sachs, it's your obligation to help, to utilize your talents to study and teach Torah. And this had such an amazing impact on Rabbi Sachs that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, world-famous Lubavitcher Rebbe, took the time to speak to a young man and express such confidence in his ability to make an impact on Klal Yisrael that Rabbi Sachs picked himself up and he decided he was going to go into the rabbinate, and he studied in yeshiva in London, and then the rest of his career followed from that. And you see how amazing the impact of the Lubavitcher Rebbe was. And somebody who's a chassid will say, that's because the Lubavitcher Rebbe had Ruach HaKodesh. He was divinely inspired. He knew that Rabbi Sachs was going to be a great person, and that's why he had that conversation. I would venture to say, maybe that's also true, but I would venture to say that the Lubavitcher Rebbe had the same conversation with countless young men that came to his court, and he saw within them elements of greatness that, if developed properly, they could become the leaders of Klal Yisrael. And he had the same discussion with Rabbi Sachs without, again, if he didn't have Ruach HaKodesh, I'm not a Lubavitcher chassid, maybe the Lubavitchers will say for sure he did. Maybe, I'm not saying he did not. But I would suspect that at the moment that he had that conversation, or at least it's a possibility, at the moment of that conversation, he did not know the impact that he was having on Rabbi Sachs. But what he did know is that a person never knows what is going to be a defining moment. And he understood that he, in his position, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, spending 15 minutes or a half hour, however long the audience was, with this young man who obviously was eloquent and had a brilliant mind, the Lubavitcher Rebbe felt, I'm going to invest in him, and I'm going to ask him, what is he doing to help change the Jewish community? How is he going to make an impact? And that question transformed Rabbi Sachs and catapulted him into the position in which he became. And so therefore it ties very beautifully into this week's parsha, that just as the defining moment for Rivka was an event of almost superficially, ostensibly, of zero consequence. So she gave water to the camels to drink. Big deal. What difference does that make? And nonetheless, because of that, she became the wife of Yitzchak Avinu and a matriarch in Klal Yisrael. In the same way, the conversation that Rabbi Sachs had with Lubavitcher Rebbe, there must have been countless people that had the same type of conversation, and none of them were changed. None of them were moved. So you would say, okay, so it's just another conversation with a college student with the Rebbe. But that conversation became the defining moment. Just as Rivka's defining moment was giving water to the camels, the Rabbi Sachs's defining moment was having that conversation with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And what we need to take away from this is the same message that Rabbi Kiva wanted to impart on his Talmidim, the importance of every single action that we do. We don't know which things that we're doing are going to change people's lives. Rabbi Sachs didn't become Rabbi Sachs overnight. It was years later that he became the chief rabbi of England, and he had he wrote the 25 books. All the things that he accomplished happened years later. We don't know how many years later if things that we do can have an impact, and the consequences will first take place years in advance. And it's true about our own self-development, that we could impact on our. We are the ones that have to change our own selves, and we could choose to move in a transformative direction. But it's also true in terms of a relationship with others. If you can have a conversation with a person that you meet on a train, and you never met him before, and you'll never see him again later on, you could change his life. I met at least 10 times. I met people that were not observant in my youth. This type of story would not happen today. But they told me they went to Cheder. They went to yeshiva when they were young kids. And then they left the path. Why is that? Because the Rebbe hit them with a ruler, or the Rebbe slapped them, or the Rebbe punished them. And that was it. They picked themselves up, and they never came back to the yeshiva. So that's a negative defining moment. It was their lives were changed. In one split second, their lives were changed because of a certain insensitivity that the person that was teaching them, and maybe at that time, maybe it was an acceptable norm of interaction. But be as it may, that small event transformed their lives. And if it's true in a negative way, it's so much more true in a positive way. It's certainly true in a positive way. You can have a conversation, just as the Rebbe had. Okay, we're not all the Lubavitcher Rebbes, but you can have a conversation. I personally have spoken to many of the young people in the shul, and not as a tribute to myself, but the fact is that the conversation that I had helped move them in different directions, where later on they became they took very important roles and positions in Klal Yisrael. And if it wasn't me, it would have been somebody else that would have done the same thing. But I'm illustrating that you could talk to somebody and you could give them encouragement, and you could bring out the special qualities that you have. And of course, this is true of our relationship with our children, that we have to build up our children. At the Levaya for Rabbi Sachs, his daughter spoke so beautifully and eloquently. And she spoke about the fact that her father taught her and her siblings, always have confidence that you could, whatever you want to do, you're able to do. He was able to impart that message to her. And we are constantly imparting messages to our children, positive values and negative values. And we have to realize, just as Rabbi Kiva wanted his Talmidim to appreciate the importance of every moment and every action and every activity, we have to realize also that, who knows, a conversation that we're having with our children, or the way we respond to a situation, that might be a defining moment. I've gone I've heard at bar mitzvahs, I've heard numerous times where in one of the drushes that the parent of the bar mitzvah gives about his relationship with his father or his mother, and something that they did that changed their lives. My great uncle, Mr. Gann, who donated maybe $500,000 to our shul. He was an extremely wealthy person. He gave away tens of millions of dollars to yeshivas and to shuls. He told me that one thing that inspired him was that when he was a young boy, his mother would send him every Shabbos to deliver challahs to a widow who lived an hour away, and he would bring her religiously every week. He would bring the challahs. And one week he went, and she wasn't home, and he came back with the challahs, and his mother said, "What are you doing? Why do you have the challahs?" His mother happened to be my great grandmother. This is my great uncle. She said, "Why you have the challahs?" He said, "There was nobody home." She said, "The woman's going to be on Shabbos without any food to eat. Run back and deliver the challahs." And he said that left such an important impression on him. The importance of caring about other people and their needs. My great uncle lived to be over 100 years, and that story, that episode, that incident was for him a life-defining, a life-changing moment. And his mother taught him an important lesson in giving tzedakah. And as a result, because he gave 2 challahs to an almana throughout his life, he gave hundreds of millions of dollars to tzedakah and to Jewish causes as well. So this is an enormously important lesson that we could take away from Rivka And we take it away also from the story that I just shared with you about the encounter of the Lubavitcher Rebbi with Rabbi Sachs, that everything that we do potentially is of great consequence, even if it's as trivial as giving a drink to a camel. Everything that a human being does is has the potential to be of great consequence, and therefore we should, recognizing that, we should engage in human activities with a seriousness that and maturity that the actions deserve, and in that way, indeed, our lives will have great import and consequence.